Survivors of the zombie apocalypse seek refuge, but fall into a trap. Hi all. This is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the 14th, 15th and 16th episodes of the 4th season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description.
Carol and Lizzie watch at night while Tyrese and Micah sleep on the train tracks. Lizzie asks Carol if she has had children before. Carol replies that she had a daughter who didn't have a single evil bone in her. Is that why she's not here right now? Lizzie asks. Carol nods. The next morning, Tyrese calculates that they are several days away from Terminus. When they follow the tracks, Carol tells Tyrese that she is worried about the girl's survival, believing that Micah is too soft, and Lisa does not understand what a walker is. Carol and Tyrese smell smoke and note that there must be a bonfire burning nearby. Carol and Micah go in search of water, and Tyree lies down on his injured arm. The walker moves towards Tyrese and Lisa, but falls into a gap in the rails, falling into a trap. While Tyrese prepares his hammer, Lizzie begs him to keep the walker alive. Sometimes they have to be killed, she admits, but sometimes not. Meanwhile, Carol urges Micah to get tougher. Micah insists that she can kill walkers, but she won't kill people because it's wrong. Carol says Micah will die if she doesn't change. They find a house in the middle of a walnut grove. Carol suggests they stay there for a couple of days. Carol and Tyrese check the house for walkers while the girls wait outside with Judith. Lizzie is afraid that the adults will find the walker inside and kill him. They are inhumans. Reproaches Micah, to which Lizzie does not agree. The walker attacks Lizzie and Micah shoots him. Carol and Tyrese run outside to check on the girls. When Lizzie cries for the dead walker, Micah calms her down by telling her to look at the flowers and count to 3. In the evening, the group sits by the fireplace in the living room. Tyrese watches the peaceful scene and expresses satisfaction. Micah suggests they make the house their home. The next day, Carol sees Lizzie playing in the yard with a walker, whom Lizzie calls Griselda. She runs out into the street and kills him with her knife. "She's my friend, and you killed her," Lizzie screams. Carol says that the walker wanted to kill Lizzie, but Lizzie refuses to listen. While hunting in the woods, Carol tells Mickey that she is smarter than her sister when it comes to walkers. They notice a deer. Micah aims the rifle, but in the end can't pull the trigger. Carol looks disappointed at this. Collecting well water with Carol, Tari suggests that they live in the house, and not go to Terminus. "I trust you," he tells Carol, admitting that he is not ready to be with other people yet. Micah finds Lisa feeding a mouse to a walker stuck on a railway track and makes remarks to her. "They just want me to change, to become the same as them," insists Lisa. When she reaches for the grinning mouth of a walker, new walkers appear from the forest. Micah grabs Lisa and they run away. Tyrese and Carol hear the girls' screams and discover that they are being chased by a pack of walkers. All 4 of them line up and exchange fire with the walkers. In the evening, Carol asks Lisa if she has finally understood what a walker is. "Now I know what I need to do," Lisa replies. "It's ugly, scary and changes you," says Carol, "but that's how we ended up here." The next day, Carol and Tyrese are hunting together in the woods. Carol is warm to Tyrese's idea of living in the house permanently. Tyrese then confesses that he is haunted by nightmares about Karen and the man who killed her. Carol and Tyrese arrive at the house and find Lizzie standing over Mickey's corpse with a bloody knife in her hand. Judith is lying on a blanket nearby, still alive. "Don't worry, she'll be back," he tells Lisa about his sister. "I didn't damage her brain." Lisa also states that she was going to do the same with Judith. Carol and Tyrese try to disarm Lisa, but she points a gun at them, insisting that they have to wait until Micah wakes up. Carol takes the gun away from Lizzie and dissuades her from harming Judith. Tyrese brings Lisa and Judith into the house. Left alone, Carol sobs, and then pulls out a knife to lay Micah down. That evening, Tyrese says that he found out that Lizzie was feeding walkers in prison, and they wonder if Lizzie killed Karen and David. It wasn't her. Carol says, doubting Lizzie would let them transform. Tyrese offers to leave with Judith to protect her, but Carol sees only one option for Lizzie. She can't be around other people, she says, implying that Lizzie should be killed for her own safety. Carol takes Lisa out for a walk while Tyrese watches her from the window. "Please don't be angry with me. I didn't mean to point a gun at you," Lisa wails, sensing Carol's mood. Carol tells Lisa to look at the flowers and pulls out her revolver. Carol pulls the trigger of the revolver back and after a moment pulls the trigger. After that, Carol and Tyree dig graves for the girls in front of the house. That night, Carol gives Tyrese her revolver and confesses that she killed Karen and David. "I had to stop the disease," she explains, offering him to do whatever he needed. Tyrese grabs the table, trying to contain her anger. "I forgive you," he finally says. "But I will never forget," he continues. "It's a part of you now." The next day, Carol and Tyrese leave the grove with Judith and resume their journey along the railroad tracks. Abraham, Glenn, Tara, Rosita and Eugene walk along the railroad tracks. Eugene talks about video games, and Tara hands Eugene a metal object that, in his opinion, can be used to make a homemade battery. Tara and Glenn stumble upon messages about Terminus, which Maggie had previously left for him. Believing she is still alive, Glenn runs ahead of the group. Joe's group, without Daryl, are at Bob and Sasha's old camp. They were woken up by a walker who got stuck in the wires. After killing the walker, the group notices that Daryl is not with them. Len notices that Daryl's things are still in the camp, and goes in search of him. Rick, Carl and Michonne are on another section of the railway track. Carl and Michonne walk along the rails to see who will last longer in balance. Michonne tries to scare Carl to win the bet, but accidentally falls herself. Carl chooses one of the last two candies in stock. Choosing a chocolate bar with the image of a big cat, he shares it with her. Meanwhile, Daryl is hunting when Len appears behind him. They both shoot and kill the rabbit. Len takes the rabbit and argues with Daryl until they are interrupted by the Marauder leader Joe. Joe explains to Daryl that the band has one rule: if they need something, they demand it. He then cuts the rabbit in half for Daryl and Len, since the former did not know about this rule. Glenn's group stumbles upon a building where they see a walker on one of the upper floors. He stumbles towards them, gradually approaching the open ledge. Fearing that he will fall on Eugene, Abraham pushes him out of the way. At the same time, Tara accidentally falls to the ground and gets a leg injury. Abraham demands that everyone rest, but Glenn insists on continuing. They come to a compromise. Glenn gives his equipment to Eugene. In exchange, Abraham agrees to escort Glenn and Tara to Terminus. As they walk along the tracks, Joe persuades Daryl to stay with them. He explains that membership in the group implies compliance with certain rules. For example, if a group member steals from the group or lies to another member, he will be punished with a severe beating. The group finds a garage, and Joe announces that they will stay there overnight. Turning to Daryl, Joe remarks that there is nothing sadder than a street cat who thinks she is a room cat. Joe talks about people like us, but Daryl replies, "There are no us." Joe slowly turns to face Daryl and asks if he's going to leave. Daryl doesn't say anything, to which Joe responds, "No, then it looks like there's us." He walks towards the building and Daryl reluctantly follows him. Glenn's group comes to a long railway tunnel and finds another sign written by Maggie. Believing she has passed through him, Glenn says he intends to follow her. Abraham points out the obvious danger, especially when they hear walkers moving around inside. Concerned that he cannot guarantee Eugene's safety in the tunnel, Abraham decides that they should split up. He leaves Glenn and Tara with 2 cans of food and a large lantern. Glenn promises that they will retreat and try to catch up with Abraham's group if they run into trouble. Entering the tunnel, Glenn and Tara discover several walkers trapped by the debris of the collapsed roof. In search of a working car, Abraham finds a minivan with a zombified woman inside. After killing her, Abraham discovers that the car is still running. On the windshield of the car, someone wrote "the dust lat Momo by," referring to the zombified woman in the back seat. Abraham uses the wipers to erase the inscription, looking slightly worried. After a playful argument, Eugene manages to convince Rosita to let him drive the car. Glenn and Tara are watching the numerous walkers in the tunnel. They decide to climb over a pile of debris blocking the tunnel. Shortly after they partially made their way through the tunnel, Tara got her foot caught on loose stones, and Glenn looks back in horror. Eugene drives the car while Rosita drives and Abraham takes a nap in the back seat. When she complains that Eugene is lost, she realizes that they are not on the other side of the tunnel. Eugene tells Rosita about his plan to wait for Glenn and Tara on the other side of the tunnel before continuing on. Eugene happens to be Abraham, who is furious at Rosita for stopping for some reason. While Abraham and Rosita are arguing, Eugene sees something in the direction of the tunnel. After Joe's group spends the night in the garage, where everyone except Daryl demands a car for the night, forcing him to sleep on the floor, Daryl wakes up to Len accusing him of stealing his half of the rabbit. Joe throws out Daryl's bag and finds half of Len's rabbit. Daryl tells the group that he was framed. After Len asks again if Len framed Daryl, or if he answers that he didn't, John punches Len, knocking him to the ground. Joe encourages the group to teach Len a lesson, after which he reveals that he saw Len put a rabbit in Daryl's bag, but wanted to let Len prank him. The group brutally beats Lena to death. A new group consisting of Abraham, Eugene, Rosita, Maggie, Bob and Sasha saves Glenn and Tara from 3 walkers in the tunnel. Later, Maggie mentions that she shot into the roof of the tunnel to lure the walkers into a trap, and they were able to move to the other side. While resting in the tunnel, Eugene manages to convince Abraham to go to Terminus with the others so they can rest and regroup before continuing on to Washington. After leaving the camp with the group, Daryl sees Len's beaten body with an arrow in his head. Joe informs Daryl that they are tracking down a man, Rick, who killed one of them and may be heading to Terminus. Daryl asks about Terminus, and Joe replies that Terminus is a lie. Daryl notices a lone strawberry growing out of the ground and claims it. Joe, Daryl and the Marauders walk past the candy wrapper that Carl and Michonne previously shared lying between the sleepers on the rails, indicating that they are walking behind Rick, Carl and Michonne. A large group consisting of Abraham, Eugene, Rosita, Maggie, Bob, Sasha, Glenn Tara easily enters the silent terminus and observes the tranquility of the area. In the courtyard, a woman doing laundry is standing with her back to the group. Hearing their approach, she turns around and introduces herself to Mary. A friendly woman greets a haggard group of survivors on Terminus and offers to cook them a plate. The scene ends with Mary's words,
"Welcome to Terminus."
Rick, Carl and Michonne are camping in the woods, sitting around a campfire and checking one of the newly installed traps for animals. As a result, they find a small rabbit, and after Rick explains in detail to Carl how he was caught, he hears a cry for help and runs a little further into the forest. Rick and Michonne try to stop him, but are forced to give chase. They all find a man in a large forest clearing, and he barely fights off a herd of walkers. Carl quickly raises his beret, but Rick stops him in the form that they are clearly in the minority and it's too late for the man, as the walkers break into him, first tearing out his right eye. Several walkers notice the 3 as they run away. Rick, Carl and Michonne pass through a railroad crossing and fight with several walkers on the way, after which they continue to retreat. The group eventually finds an abandoned SUV and decides to camp near it for the night. Later, Rick and Michonne discuss business around the campfire, while Carl sleeps in the truck. Joe and his group suddenly appear and ambush Rick and Michonne. Meanwhile, Carl is ambushed by Dan of the car. Tony immediately recognizes Rick, and the group realizes that they managed to find their man. It was he who killed Lou. After John starts a tense countdown, Daryl appears and tries to end the scene. Daryl claims that Rick and the others are good people, but Joe just tells him that Rick was responsible for killing their friend. When Daryl offers himself instead of Rick, Joe looks shocked. He calls Daryl a liar for saying that Rick is a good person, and calls on the rest of the group to beat Daryl to death for lying. Joe then informs Rick that they are going to beat Daryl to death, rape Carl, then Michonne, and finally end them by killing Rick. While Dan is trying to rape Carl, Rick lands a headbutt backwards that hits Joe in the face, stunning him. Joe reflexively shoots and misses, but the shot hits Rick right in the head, which stuns him for a moment. Rick punches Joe, who retaliates with his pistol whip, knocking Rick to the ground. While Rick tries to get to his feet, still a little shell-shocked, Joe fixes Rick in place by grabbing him, pinning his arms and holding him motionless. Joe asks, "What the hell are you going to do now, man?" In response, Rick bites his carotid artery, killing him. Then Michonne, taking advantage of the chaos, kills Tony and Harley with shots to the head from Tony's revolver, who watched in horror as their leader was killed in one of the most brutal ways. Daryl then took advantage of the pause to knock Billy to the ground and viciously trample him to death. When all the members of his group are dead, Dan still holds Carl hostage and tells everyone not to approach, otherwise he will kill Carl without hesitation. Then Rick grabs Joe's penknife and goes straight at Dan, saying, "He's mine." Dan lets go of Carl, who runs off into Michonne's arms. Rick quickly approaches the stunned Dan. Dan begs for mercy, but Rick does not want to listen to him and stabs him several times, destroying him. Carl narrows his eyes, watching what is happening. Returning to the numb Rick leaning against the SUV, Daryl hands Rick a rag soaked in water so that Rick can dry off. Inside the SUV, Michonne holds Carl's sleeping head to her. Daryl begins to blame himself for not having the slightest trust in his former comrades, but Rick says it's not his fault and that he's Rick's brother. Eventually Carl wakes up and hears Rick and Daryl talking. Soon after, they find Terminus. The group decides to split up to explore the facility before sneaking inside, in case Terminus turns out to be not quite the shelter it pretends to be. Carl and Michonne go together, where they have a moment of rapprochement. Michonne tells Carl about how her son died in the refugee area, which was invaded by walkers while Michonne was jogging. Her partner and suddenly did nothing to protect her because they were on drugs. After being bitten, she admits that she allowed them to transform, then removed their jaws and arms and used them to protect herself from other walkers. She also admits that her act was sick. After this comment, Carl says that Rick is proud of him, but feels that out of all these terrible thoughts in his head, he deserves nothing and that he is just another monster. Rick puts his Colt in a duffel bag full of weapons and buries it in the woods behind Terminus in case of unforeseen circumstances. Then the four make their way inside by climbing over the fence. They end up in a room where a bunch of people work, including Garrett's characters, Alex, a woman repeating the phrase "shelter for everyone" into a radio transmitter, which Daryl, Michonne, Tyrese and Bob heard in the car during a trip for medicines much earlier. Gareth asks the four to lay down their weapons and calls out to them, welcoming them to Terminus and warning them not to try to do anything stupid while Alex shows them around. Strangely, he doesn't take their weapons. During a meeting with the mayor's office offering food, Rick draws attention to a lot of items held by the survivors in the Terminus, such as Glenn's gear, Daryl's poncho that Maggie was wearing, the orange hitchhiker's backpack that Glenn took from prison, and even Herschel's distinctive pocket watch. Realizing that something is wrong, he angrily beats off a plate of food that Alex offers Carl, grabs Alex and puts a .45 caliber, which he took from Joe, to his face, demanding to tell where their people are and why their group has pocket watches, riot gear and ponchos. Alex lies and claims that he found a pocket watch on a dead man, and Gareth also hides behind a lie, claiming that the equipment was found on a dead policeman and Ponchi's on a clothesline. Alex then accidentally shoots and kills one of his own, which causes a big shootout in which Rick, Michonne, Carl and Daryl flee. They are forced to run through several alleys riddled with bullets, which indicates that the survivors in Terminus also treated many other newcomers. During the chase, the team briefly turns to the left as they run, and bones and flesh are clearly visible in the foreground, scattered on a blue tarpaulin. Muffled cries for help can also be heard from nearby shipping containers. Soon the group reaches the back fence of Terminus, but stops as it sees that many residents of Terminus are lined up behind the surrounding fences with weapons. Garrett orders the four to lower their weapons again. With no other choice, Rick gives up. After that, Garrett calls them by certain nicknames so that they enter the car located to their right. Rick is the leader, Daryl is the archer, Michonne is the samurai and Carl is the kid, in that order. After entering the car and closing the door, they find Bob, Maggie, Sasha, Glenn, Tara, Abraham, Rosita and Eugene. Rick notices Tara from the governor's army, but doesn't say anything. Abraham notices that they won't be there for long, to which Rick replies no. Then Rick goes to the hole in the side wall of the car and says they will feel very stupid when they find out. Abraham asks Rick what they will find out, to which Rick replies, "They ran into the wrong ones."